Hello and welcome to the first CX Files Q&A session with myself and Peter. It's Monday, 24th July 2023, and I'm Mark Hillary in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yeah, and Mark, it's exciting to be here for this first Q&A session. I'm Peter Ryan, based in Montreal, Quebec, and just a little bit of a background for the listeners. You and I both subscribe to a podcast called The Rest is Politics. Now, it's hosted by two people who will be very familiar to British listeners. It's hosted by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. And every couple of episodes, they'll take a series of questions that have been sent in by their listeners and address them, giving their opinions, giving their observations. So we thought that we'd try something a little bit similar. And what we've done is we've solicited via LinkedIn as well as through email questions from our listeners and people that follow our podcast on anything related to customer experience management, but we've also had one or two questions come in as it relates to the music and culture of the 1980s. I don't know what they're trying to tell us there.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that, there's a few fans of your Friday polls on LinkedIn, which have generally got nothing at all to do with CX anyway.
Not really, no. It's hard to make that linkage, but we'll do our best today.
All right. Well, it's worth saying up front before we sort of dive into this that, I think that any of the people asking questions are just doing it in a personal capacity. I don't want to sort of attach, any perspective or view to a specific company. So it's probably worth getting that out of the way right at the start. So why don't we kick off with Andrew, our old friend at ThinScale, Andrew McNeil. He actually asked, I think it was more, he was asking, can we talk to somebody and get a future guest? But what he was basically saying is that if you talk today to a hotel, a bank, or an airline, then their IVR, it always tries diverting you to the website or some other channel, like, have you downloaded our app? Have you gone online to try and fix this problem? Most of us have heard this, and yet most of us do now go online first to try fixing a problem.
Yeah.
So how come, when you fail to fix it online, you failed with the app, and so then you go to phone them, the first thing they say is, why don't you download our app?
Yeah, it's really bad, and it's something that's pervasive. I actually read a story today in one of the French language newspapers here in Quebec about somebody who went to donate blood at the local blood agency, and because of the fact that they hadn't made an appointment on their application, they were refused entry to actually make a donation. And right now, there's a crisis in Canada in regards to the blood bank, in regards to the availability of blood, but because of the fact that a digital means to schedule an appointment wasn't used, this individual who came in good faith to make a blood donation wasn't able to. And Mark, I think that this points to a major problem and a major fail that we're seeing across customer experience. Airlines, banks, hotels, these are just some examples. Now that we're talking about blood agencies, there's another one. But the reality is that individuals who are looking to try and schedule something or try and resolve something don't necessarily want to be told to download an application. They don't want to be told they have to be pushed to a digital means of doing so. And again, I think that this points to what's going to separate organizations, regardless of industry. That's going to separate the companies that are going to be able to maintain a loyal customer base versus those that are going to see it eroded over an extended period of time because of the fact they just simply refuse to invest in the customer experience management that their end users deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's just a real failure of the omni-channel approach to customer service. I see this with my bank, where the only reason I will ever call them is because it's something serious or I have a big problem. It's like I've lost my card or something, somebody is using my account with, there's transactions without my knowledge there. And I need immediate attention and immediate help. Anything else, I'm going to go to the website or the app. And so I don't understand why they don't understand this, because the bank takes absolutely ages to answer calls and the repeated messages, go and download our app. It's a real failure to do this.
It is a real failure. And one of the big concerns I have, especially here in Canada, where we're heavily regulated when it comes to anything to do with financial services, the moment you go to the app and you try and do something, it tells you that it can't be done, that you have to go into your branch and try and get it resolved there. So it's just it's the definition of insanity. You just want to sit there and bang your head against the wall after a while.
Yeah, I have that problem right now. I just changed my phone this week, and it means I actually have to go
Oh,
to two different bank branches to get my apps working again, which is just a nightmare.
yeah, no, that's no fun. And it was funny because I heard a podcast the other day that I listened to, and somebody was talking about how they were going to get some new vanity plates for a classic car that they bought, and they said the reason they haven't done it so far is because they don't have the courage to bring themselves to go into the DMV for the afternoon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the sort of place, like visiting a post office these days, where you may as well bring your Kindle along with you because you're going to be there for some time.
But I will say this from this perspective of visiting the post office. I have found in my last couple of visits in the US where I've had to, funnily enough, go to the post office, and in the UK where I had to mail something, it was relatively pain-free. They've really perfected the self-service. They've really perfected having people around self-service to help a customer who might not necessarily know what they should be doing to make sure their transaction goes well. Unfortunately, here in Canada, it's just a lesson in tedium where you don't have self-service, where you've got to wait in an endless lineup as people are picking up packages that they weren't home to receive or looking to buy postal orders or whatever. And I just ask myself again, why can't the investment in good customer experience when it comes to automated or self-service solutions be made in particular countries that clearly have the resources to do so and just won't?
Yeah, yeah. So why don't we go on to the next question that we had from the listeners?
Great
And
idea.
this was Stuart Ferguson at Connector in the US. And he asked, what do we think the effect of AI will be on agent numbers? How many agents are going to be impacted by the increasing use of AI? And then a sort of follow-up to that is, do we think that if AI is sort of taking over the customer experience, then it will be tech companies like Google and Amazon in future taking over this space rather than the sort of current CX giants we all know and love?
Well, that's a very hard one. And in terms of quantifying the numbers, I think that's very much at this point uncertain. It's almost like a how long is a piece of string type question. Not to say that it shouldn't be asked, but we've seen very, very varied estimations about what this might look like. And, I go back to the days, remember, Mark, when RPA and automation was really coming in. There was like another wave of it going back about 10 years ago. And we heard wild estimates about 80-90% of contact center jobs would be lost to automation. Clearly, that didn't happen. Certainly, there were some. And I think we can all experience when we get on the telephone and contact an organization or we get on to a digital interaction, there is certainly a front end that is automated in many cases, but you do get through to a human eventually if you need to speak to somebody. So I would be very remiss in terms of giving a number in terms of what that might look like, at least in the near to medium term.
Yeah, where I find automation really useful for my own encounters is using WhatsApp. And, so if I want to engage with like my electric or water company here in Brazil, I can just send like a hi message on WhatsApp and they will respond immediately and say, what is it that you need? And then I'll just ask for whatever I need. And I can tell you, it always understands and gets it right. I think maybe because my inquiries are generally quite simple. It's something like, can I have a look at my last bill or something like that? But, I never have to engage with a person for engaging with those utilities. And that's not even sort of engaging with the more recent wave of generative AI that we're seeing right now. I think it's probably worth mentioning that if anybody missed the most recent interview with Keith Gate, which will have gone out a few days before this podcast goes out, go back and listen to that, because Keith is the chief executive of the CX Foundation in the UK. He talks to people from all across the industry, and we actually did discuss this topic. And he was saying, look, everybody is talking about this, but then if you sort of sit down in the round tables and talk to all of the companies involved on both the buy side and the sell side, then lots of people are experimenting and running pilots, but there's nobody who's really cracked this yet. There's nobody that's saying, we have a major replacement of our agents ongoing because we're rolling out ChatGPT or some other sort of AI solution. So there's definitely an improvement that we've seen, but it's not like a agent apocalypse that's taking place right now.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm happy that I'm seeing is a challenge to this hype cycle around AI, and the fact is that AI is not going to start performing major surgery anytime soon. The fact is that AI is not going to be launching rockets to Mars anytime soon, and it certainly got a long way to go before it makes any great transformation in the realm of actual frontline CX delivery. 6-7 months ago, all we were hearing about was Chat GPT and what it was going to be able to do to revolutionize everything from a customer experience management standpoint. And there's no question that there are some great applications, but we also have to be pragmatic in terms of functionality and timelines. And I'm seeing a little bit more of a balance coming back in regards to what's being published on LinkedIn and what I'm seeing across my different news feeds.
Yeah, and I think that also we focused a lot on the sort of direct customer interaction rather than how AI can actually improve processes inside the contact center. So clearly we're going to see those chatbots improving. So we might, get a few more percent of inquiries actually being handled automatically. But the real sort of immediate benefit will be agents not having to write up notes after calls because it's automatically transcribed, it's automatically categorized into a certain area. The sentiment of the customer is automatically logged. The quality control is automated because the supervisors are just directed to specific calls where there might be a problem rather than having to pick out random calls. So you can see that there's definitely going to be a productivity boost. We can handle a lot more volume with 100 agents than we used to be able to, but you're still going to need those people there at the core of the service.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more, Mark. And that's the end of the day. This is a people business, and this is what I think a lot of the so-called evangelists can't lose sight of, is that it can augment the agent experience. In certain cases, it might be able to augment a customer experience, but AI is there to serve people, and it's either from an internal or customer-facing perspective.
Okay, so why don't we talk about something that's been, a big topic in this industry for the past few years, especially since the pandemic, and that's work from home.
Yep.
Michelle Rowan sent us a comment. She's from the Work from Home Alliance, and actually
Yep.
she's going to feature on the podcast quite soon.
Yep.
And she just asked if we have any thoughts on some of the trends around work from home sourcing, hiring, onboarding, and learning. I think that what I would throw in initially there is that I think that we've seen some very big changes. Work from home, during the pandemic, it was very much an emergency response, and it was something that we were handling with communication tools like Zoom and Teams, Slack for conversations. But if you look around at, especially at the BPO community, they are all pretty much now talking about integrated communication platforms that are essentially virtual offices. You can have people in the office, people at home, people inside a WeWork or other sort of temporary office, and they are grouped together and they can work as a team in one space. Sonsei has been doing this for years with their live desk. TP has been talking about their cloud campus for a while now, and I think that these kind of tools do allow onboarding, hiring, training, and I think that idea of the virtual office is actually, I think, where the metaverse hype could actually be a reality. Because we're seeing virtual offices are making work from home really work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there's more or less an acceptance now that virtual working and all the different components, all the different inputs involved in virtual working are a reality. It's structural. It's part of what we do in customer experience. for the longest time, I've been chatting with a lot of my clients and saying, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a debate about whether remote working is part of the dynamic. It's what level each individual company is going to be able to find that equilibrium at. Now, a lot of what you mentioned here, Mark, I think makes sense. And I think Michelle asks an outstanding question. There are a lot of different elements in terms of making sure that work from home or remote working is something that people are not just going to sign on for, but they're going to enjoy doing. Because the more they enjoy doing it, the more they're going to stick around. That's going to lead to better outcomes. That's going to lead to more stability in individual organizations, CX departments. What I would suggest here is that from my own interactions with outsourcers, with their clients, there seems to be still a fair amount of tension between the agent community and the employers about if people do want to work from home, how much this is going to be tolerated or at what level it's going to be tolerated, the number of days out of the office, the number of workstations at any one time being handled remotely. The reality is we know that many different organizations, whether they were in-house or whether they were outsourced, have sunk a lot of money into their own corporate real estate. A lot of them made some big investments in retrofits over the course of the pandemic to ensure that there was a nice, fun, funky place for people to come back to. They're going to want to sweat the assets, and I totally get that. But when you've got a labor pool which is increasingly demanding flexibility in regards to being able to work remotely in obviously a secure environment, a compliant environment, it's still a question that I think we're going to be seeing some shaking out around over the course of the next couple of years. I don't think we're at that point yet where we can really say, what's a hybrid environment going to look like? What is the ideal formula for this? I don't think it exists yet. And from what I can tell from my interactions with clients around the world, they're still at quite a loss. So it's going to be an interesting journey to watch, but I think that we're going to have to be patient.
Yeah, and if you follow people like Nick Bloom at Stanford or Bruce Daisley, the former European boss of Twitter, who's now sort of been writing a lot about modern working practices, he's got a podcast that he does just focused on this. But you listen to any of these people, and it's still an active, ongoing debate. I mean, nobody really knows how the hybrid working is going to shake out. I think, though, like you said, it is the reality. This is the new normal. We're not going back to 2019, and so clearly there is a very different sort of work style and work environment, and we just need to figure out where it's going to be. But clearly it's not going to be comfortable being a corporate landlord over the next couple of years.
No, and we're already seeing that in the news. There's a lot of concerns about how corporate real estate's going and what it's going to mean. So yeah, the interesting journey, the interesting pathway is ahead of us.
Excellent. Well, why don't we take the obligatory 1980s question then, which I think was from a friend of yours. Idea.
Yes. Mr. Paul from Toronto has asked if Queen live at Wembley 1986 was the greatest concert video ever. Well, much as I respect Paul's interest and his insight into anything 1980s, I would suggest I don't think it is. To my mind, the best concert video ever is got to be Live Aid. It's something that I watch once a year. In fact, I'll be breaking it out, I think, this weekend to celebrate what I believe is the 38th anniversary of Live Aid, which is just incredible. I can't even believe that I'm saying the number 38 in front of it. But to my mind, that really sheds the light on the best concert video ever. And Mark, I would say one other thing. If we were to distinguish between the two parts of Live Aid, the part in Philadelphia and London, I've got my choice, but which one do you think really hit the mark?
I preferred London, to be honest, but
me too.
I think maybe maybe because I can still remember actually watching London live, and then Philadelphia was sort of stretching far into the night.
Yeah, and I will say I do think that London had a very tight lineup of people. I think that they had a very tight organization. We can remember with the Philadelphia concert, there were a number of different mishaps. I remember Jack Nicholson preparing to introduce Canada's own Bryan Adams, and not knowing who he was actually supposed to be introducing, and then screaming at the person on the side to find out what Bryan Adams' name actually was,
Yeah,
which is just
yeah.
classic. You can see it on YouTube. And wasn't there something too with the Thompson twins and Madonna? The performance didn't go as well it was supposed to. There were some flub ups there. I believe Duran Duran might have been under the influence of some lager based beverages as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was certainly Led Zeppelin as well, and it was big news that they were reuniting for Live Aid, but when they played,
Yeah.
it sounded like they hadn't really rehearsed. They were just getting together just for the name on the door, you know.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about Live Aid was that while there were some heavy metal bands that played, Led Zeppelin would fall into that category, Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne reunited, Judas Priest played, but there was a pushback in the 1980s by a lot of the hard rock and heavy metal community members, the fact that they hadn't necessarily been as involved in Live Aid or in USA for Africa or in Band Aid, and they went and did their own charitable initiative called Hear Aid that was recorded in 1985 but released in 1986 and was quite successful in itself. It was championed by the late great Ronnie James Dio.
Excellent. Well, you know, I'm sure that really the way that that whole thing played out, nobody was thinking about diversity or diversity of music styles or anything. It was just, you know, who was in Bob Geldof's phone book, really, wasn't it? It was just, you know, who could he get a hold of?
Yeah, and I just on the note about Geldof, I'd recommend to anybody to look at a documentary you can find on YouTube. It's a BBC one that somebody's uploaded, and I think it's either called The Story of Live Aid, but it really goes into the weeds about how the whole thing started, what Bob Geldof did. My favorite was when he was doing the press conference to announce Live Aid, the fact that he was announcing bands that he hadn't even spoken to, and his view was it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission, and looks like it worked.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and just to close that out, I would actually just throw in that Genesis '87 at Wembley is also a fantastic concert and really shows them, I think, at the peak of their powers. So that one you can find that on YouTube as well.
And I would be remiss to say that one of the best concerts, I've never been to Wembley Stadium, but I did see a concert in Wembley with yourself and Stephen Lloyd and somebody else who we're going to mention in just a couple of minutes. And that was the Bible Code Sundays at Watkins Folly in the town of Wembley, one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had in my life in the greater London area, London nightlife.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was definitely a good night out in the shadow of Wembley Stadium. But you should probably mention one of the characters that we were out with that evening then.
Yeah, as many in the CX and the BPO community will be aware, we had a friend of ours who passed away recently, Dominic Pennell, who is probably one of the most legendary characters I've ever met. Dom left this world at 54 years old. He had been suffering from a number of chronic health problems for some time, but I don't want to belabor this too much. He was a very dear friend. Trips to London will never be the same. The fact that I don't get to meet up with him and have a few drinks and go for dinner. Certainly somebody who is very well known also in his own neighborhood of the Waterloo, Southwark area in London. The pub that he frequented, the Hope and Anchor, it was truly a magnificent spot, even though they got angry one night when I called the pub's telephone line looking for Dom to try and get a hold of him. And I was asked to inform him when they put him on the line that this is not his answering service, but he certainly was a larger than life character who will be missed moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll definitely second that. And, you know, I can remember several great evenings and lunches. You know, Dom loved his food. He was a wine expert. You know, he was certified in wine tasting. I mean, he could speak multiple European languages fluently. So, you know, he was always a very interesting guy to go out with, and will definitely be missed.
Yeah.
Let's just close out then with, I mean, is there anything else that you're seeing going on at the moment that has been affecting you or interesting you or really catching your attention then?
You know, there's a lot of stuff going on, Mark, right now that I think's interesting and is catching my eye from the perspective of what's happening in our industry and even the broader economy on the whole. But I would just suggest it's summertime. It's slowed down quite a lot, and probably will be ramping up into September in the not too distant future. It's amazing how fast the summer months and weeks fly by. But I would only say I've really enjoyed this Q&A session, and I would encourage all of our listeners to send in your questions as it relates to what's going on in CX, different technologies that are emerging, different business models like we've talked about with regards to remote working versus some of the more traditional manners of delivering CX. There's been a lot going on in the nearshore and offshoring world, as well as in the realm of social media. So, keep those questions coming in. We look forward to answering them. And always feel free to send in anything related to 1980s music and culture. Mark and I, obviously, you can tell, really enjoy that.
Yeah, in fact, I asked Peter the other day, have you seen the new Wham documentary on Netflix? And of course, he replied, I've already seen it twice and I'm probably going to watch it again. So,
Guaranteed.
Anything
Guaranteed.
to do with 80s culture, and definitely keep the questions coming, because the whole point of this is to go beyond the weekly interview that we do and actually just to have a sort of chat about the industry, and especially sort of from the perspective of people who are looking at all different sides of the industry, including the buy side, the sell side. What are the analysts up to and the advisors? And I guess, maybe we can pull in someone else, like some of our analyst friends, for part of this discussion in future. So let's see how it goes in future.
You bet. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.